The last light of day stretched across the Wyoming basin like a sheet of copper, catching every blade of brittle grass in a sudden flare. Caleb Morgan reined in his blue roan, gelding at the crest of a low ridge, and let the horse breathe. The land below him rolled outward in long folds of sage and stone, silent except for the restless hiss of wind. Storm clouds gathered to the west, dark as a bruise. He drew the collar of his duster higher, tasting the metallic bite of rain that had not yet fallen. Loneliness had become as familiar to him as the smell of saddle leather. Years of riding fence and branding cattle had whittled his world down to the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the occasional grunt of his cattle dog Boone. Tonight should have been no different, but something tugged at him, an itch in the air, a break in the pattern. He nudged the roan forward, eyes narrowing on a scatter of fence posts a half-mile off, where the fading sun glinted oddly. Boone, padding alongside, stopped and gave a low, questioning whine. Caleb trusted the dog's instincts more than his own. He pressed his knees, and the roan slid into a careful downhill trot, hooves crunching over gravel and dry weeds. The wind sharpened as the storm pressed closer. A distant rumble of thunder carried across the open flats. Then he heard it, a sound so faint he wondered if it belonged to the wind. A muffled cry, quick, raw, and human. He halted, every muscle tightening. Out here, miles from any ranch house, no one should be calling for help. He swung down from the saddle, boots landing with a soft thud. "Hello." His voice was swallowed by the vastness. Another cry answered, weak but unmistakable. Boone barked once and bounded ahead. Caleb followed, hand near the butt of his holstered Colt. The cry came again, sharper now, and the roan snorted uneasily behind him. As he rounded a stand of rabbit brush, he saw her. A girl, no, a young woman, stood bound to a weather-scarred fence post, wrists lashed high with coarse rope. Her dark hair whipped across a pale, dirt-smudged face. She wore a faded calico dress ripped at the hem, and her boots barely touched the ground. The sight hit him like a blow. "Easy," he said, lowering his voice as he stepped closer. "I'm not here to hurt you." Her eyes snapped open, startling gray beneath a fringe of wind-blown hair. Fear burned there, but also defiance. "Stay back," she rasped. "Don't you dare." "I won't," he interrupted gently. He kept his hands visible, palms out. "Let me cut you loose." The rope bit cruelly into her wrists. Rope burns already oozed blood. Caleb pulled the hunting knife from his belt and worked quickly, the storm's first raindrops spattering his hat brim. Each strand of rope snapped with a dry pop. When the last coil fell, the girl sagged forward, catching herself against the post. "Can you stand?" he asked. She nodded but swayed. He slipped an arm beneath her elbow, careful as if touching a skittish colt. "Name's Caleb Morgan," he offered, trying to ground her in something human. She swallowed hard. "Ella," she whispered. "Ella Hart." Boone nosed her knee, tail low and wagging. Ella flinched at first, then managed a shaky pat to the dog's head. Caleb caught the small moment of trust and stored it away. Lightning forked across the horizon, white and sudden. Thunder cracked after it like a gunshot. Caleb glanced at the sky. "We need shelter before that storm breaks. My ranch is 5 miles east. Can you ride?" Her chin lifted. "I can ride." Pride layered over exhaustion. He whistled the roan forward and helped her into the saddle. She swung a leg over with practiced ease, though her hands trembled. He mounted behind, careful to keep a respectful gap, and clicked his tongue. Boone darted ahead, a white blur in the deepening dusk. Rain began in earnest, a cold, wind-driven sheet. Hooves splashed through shallow gullies as they angled toward home. Caleb felt the girl's rigid back against his chest, every jolt of the horse transmitting her tension. He longed to ask who had left her there and why, but instinct told him to wait. Halfway to the ranch, Ella spoke, voice barely audible over the storm. "You don't have to help me. He'll come back." "Who?" Caleb asked. "My father." The word tasted bitter. "He'll be angry when he finds I'm gone." Caleb tightened his grip on the reins, but kept his voice even. "No one has the right to do what he did." She said nothing more, but he felt the shiver that coursed through her. Wind howled across the range, tearing at his coat and stinging his cheeks. The land smelled of wet sage and impending night. At the ridge above his homestead, Caleb slowed the roan. Below, the warm lamplight of his ranch house flickered like a promise against the storm. Relief pricked him, but the unease in his gut only deepened. Whoever had tied this young woman to a fence post in the open prairie was not finished with her, or with whoever dared to protect her. They descended the slope, Boone's bark echoing off the dark hills. As the horse splashed through the swollen creek at the bottom, Ella stiffened suddenly. Caleb followed her gaze back toward the ridge they had crossed. Through the gray curtain of rain a lone rider appeared, a shadow against the lightning-lit sky. The figure sat motionless for a breathless moment, then turned and disappeared into the storm. Caleb felt the chills settle deep in his bones. Whoever that was had been watching. He urged the roan forward, every sense sharpened. The storm roared around them, but the memory of that silent rider clung like a second skin. Tonight was no simple rescue. It was the opening move of a fight he had not chosen, but could no longer avoid. And as the first hailstone struck the brim of his hat, Caleb knew that whatever waited beyond this night would test more than his skill with a rope or a gun. It would test the hard shell he had built around his own lonely heart. The storm swallowed the prairie behind them, but the shadow of that rider stayed fixed in Caleb's mind, a threat riding the wind and promising the next encounter was already on its way. Rain sheeted across the valley as Caleb guided the roan into the yard. Wind slammed the barn doors like angry fists, and the smell of wet earth rose sharp and metallic. Boone darted ahead, barking at the thunder, a streak of white in the darkness. Caleb swung down and reached for Ella, but she had already gathered the reins, jaw tight as a bridled colt. "I can dismount," she said, voice steady despite the shiver that ran through her. "I know you can," Caleb answered, keeping his hands low. But the steps slick. "Careful." She slid down and landed lightly, though her soaked dress clung to her like second skin. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the ranch house, low and square, its windows glowing faintly. Caleb caught a flicker of movement near the woodpile, a shape too still to be wind or shadow. "Inside," he said, gripping Boone's collar. Ella hesitated. "What is it?" "Could be nothing." He forced calm into his tone. "Go." They dashed across the yard. The porch boards rattled under their boots. Caleb shoved the door open, ushered her in, and scanned the darkness outside one last time. The figure by the woodpile was gone. Inside, the familiar scent of pine smoke and old leather wrapped around him, a comfort tinged with warning. He barred the door, the iron latch clanging louder than usual. Ella stood near the hearth, dripping, her eyes darting from the rifle above the mantel to the single narrow window. Caleb hung his slicker on a peg. "You're safe here." Her gaze flicked to him. "You don't know that." "Fair point." He set his hat aside and went to the stove, coaxing flame from embers until heat blossomed. The kettle hissed, a small, defiant sound against the storm. Boone shook himself dry, then planted beside Ella like a sentinel. Only when steam curled from the kettle did Caleb finally speak again. "Tell me who might be following you." Ella hugged her arms. "My father. Hank Hart. He doesn't like being told no." Caleb poured coffee into 2 tin cups, the dark scent filling the room. "What did you tell him no about?" Her silence stretched until thunder rolled overhead. "He wants me to marry Jeb Parker," she said at last, each word clipped. "Jeb's near 40 and meaner than my father. Tonight, when I refused, Pa tied me to that fence to cool my temper. He said he'd come back after the saloon closed." Caleb felt heat surge through him, hotter than the fire. "That's not discipline. That's cruelty." She met his eyes then, defiance sparking through fatigue. "It's the way he's always been." The wind shrieked outside, rattling shutters. Caleb moved to the window, scanning the black yard. Rain blurred the lantern light, but a different sound threaded through the storm, a faint crunch of gravel under boots. He caught it again. Someone was out there. He grabbed the rifle from the mantel and chambered a round with a metallic snap. Ella stiffened. Boone gave a low growl. "Stay back from the window," Caleb ordered. He eased the curtain aside. Lightning flared, revealing a man-shaped shadow near the barn. "Your father." Caleb asked. Ella stepped closer, peering over his shoulder. In the flash of light her breath caught. That's him. The shadow moved toward the porch, unhurried, deliberate. Caleb's pulse quickened. Get behind the table, he said quietly. If he tries the door, I'll handle it. No, Ella whispered. He's dangerous when he drinks. So am I when someone threatens my home. Caleb kept his voice low, but unyielding. The door shuddered under a heavy knock. Ella, a rough voice bellowed, slurred with whiskey and rain. Girl, you in there? You best come out now. Caleb set his stance. Hart, this is Caleb Morgan. Your daughter's safe. Go back to town. Safe? Hank Hart's laugh was a jagged sound. She's mine to handle, not yours. Send her out, or I'll come in. The handle rattled. Boone barked, teeth bared. Caleb raised the rifle a fraction. She's of age to choose her life, he said, each word cutting through the storm. And she's under my roof tonight. Leave before this gets worse. A pause. Rain hammered the roof. Then another voice joined, deeper, meaner. Morgan, you don't scare us. Caleb's stomach tightened. So Hart hadn't come alone. Ella clutched the table edge. He brought Jeb. Caleb's mind raced. 2 armed men against one was an odds he liked. But he had cover, Boone, and the storm. He slid the window latch silently, feeling the cold, wet air seep in. If they forced the door, he'd have a clear shot. Ella, Hart called again, softer now, coaxing. You know I'll find you no matter what this cowboy says. Don't make it harder. She drew a sharp breath, then stepped from behind the table. Caleb blocked her path. Don't, he said. I'm not hiding anymore, she whispered. Her eyes held a sudden steel. If I don't stand up to him now, I never will. Outside, a board creaked. The second man's boots squelched in the mud. Caleb felt the tension coil, like a rattler ready to strike. He adjusted his grip on the rifle. Rain slick with cold under his palm. Ella raised her voice, steady despite the quaver at its edge. I'm not leaving, Pa. I won't marry Jeb. Go home. For a heartbeat, there was only rain. Then Hank roared, You ungrateful. A brilliant flash of lightning silenced him. Thunder boomed, rattling the windows. Boone barked like a gunshot. Caleb shouted over the storm. That's far enough, Hart. Another step, and you'll regret it. The shadowed figures froze. Caleb couldn't see their eyes, but he felt their fury. Seconds stretched. Finally, Hank spat into the mud, the sound sharp even through the rain. This ain't over, he snarled. You can't hide her forever. Boots slogged away, retreating into the darkness. The second set followed, slower, as if considering a final move before the storm swallowed them. Caleb kept the rifle trained on the yard until only the hiss of rain remained. His shoulders eased a fraction, though the pounding of his heart did not. Ella exhaled, trembling. They'll come back. Maybe, Caleb said. He lowered the rifle, but kept it ready. But they know I'll be waiting. She looked at him then, eyes bright with fear and something fiercer, determination. I'm not running again. Caleb studied her, struck by the resolve in someone so young. Outside, thunder rolled toward the distant hills, but another sound rose beneath it, the steady creak of a saddle, faint yet unmistakable. He turned back to the window. Through the watery dark, a lone rider lingered at the edge of the cottonwoods, separate from Hank and Jeb, watching the house like a patient predator. Caleb's grip tightened. Whoever that third rider was, he hadn't come merely to threaten. The storm might pass by morning, but the real trouble, Caleb knew, had only just begun. The storm broke overnight, leaving the high plains washed clean and glittering. Sunlight spilled across the wet grass, and the air smelled of sage and sharp pine. Caleb stepped from the barn with a pail of warm milk and felt the quiet settle on his shoulders like a familiar coat. Boone loped at his heels, tongue out, the picture of easy confidence. But the memory of that lone watcher beyond the cottonwoods clung to Caleb's thoughts like a burr. Inside the ranch house, Ella sat at the table, steam rising from a chipped mug of coffee. Her dark hair, now brushed free of storm-tangled knots, caught a ray of morning light. She looked up when Caleb entered, chin lifting with the same defiance he had seen when she faced her father. "Morning," he said, setting the pail by the sink. She nodded, fingers wrapped around the mug. I didn't sleep. Me neither. He poured coffee into his own cup, the bitter scent grounding him. They'll stay quiet for a spell, but they'll try again. Her eyes flicked to the rifle leaning against the wall. You think they're out there now? I'd bet a month's wages someone is watching. He kept his voice even. Your father won't forgive a public insult. And Jeb Parker. Caleb let the name hang like a sour note. Ella tightened her grip on the mug. I won't go back. I know. Caleb studied her, a young woman who'd been left to the mercy of the plains, and still stood proud. But staying here means danger for both of us. A silence stretched between them, filled only by Boone's contented panting. Then Ella said, If you want me gone, I can leave. I'll find work in town. That's not what I said. He met her gaze. I don't turn folks out, but we'll need a plan. A distant crow cawed. The sound made Caleb glance toward the window and freeze. A dark smear moved against the far pasture fence. Not a bird. A man. Stay inside, he ordered. He grabbed the rifle and crossed the yard, boots sinking in damp earth. Boone trotted at his side, ears flat. The figure stood just beyond the fence line, a silhouette against the silver grass. State your business, Caleb called. The man raised his hands, palms outward. Easy, Morgan. Name's Deputy Reed from town. His voice carried over the field, calm but edged. Sheriff sent me. Caleb didn't lower the rifle. Badge where I can see it. The deputy unpinned a star from his vest and held it high. Your name came up after last night. Folks said Hank Hart's been making threats. Caleb motioned him closer, though his finger stayed near the trigger. When Reed reached the gate, Caleb finally lowered the weapon a fraction. Hart came here drunk with Jeb Parker. Tried to take the girl. Reed's brows rose. Ella's here. Caleb nodded once. She's safe. The deputy stepped inside the fence, boots squelching. Town stirred up. Hart claims you kidnapped his daughter. Kidnapped. Caleb's jaw tightened. I cut her loose from a fence post. Reed sighed, glancing toward the house. Law's the law. Hart's her blood. Folks will side with him unless she speaks. She's of age, Caleb said flatly. Maybe, but she'll need to say it herself before a judge. Behind them the screen door creaked. Ella emerged, shoulders squared. I'll speak, she said. I'm 18. I choose where I live. The deputy studied her, rope burn still raw on her wrists, eyes bright with steady fire. He gave a slow nod. I'll tell the sheriff, but Hart's not likely to wait for a judge. Caleb felt the weight of that truth settle heavy. Thanks for the warning. Reed tipped his hat. Keep your rifle close. He turned and started back across the wet pasture, his figure soon swallowed by the shimmering distance. Ella let the door close behind her, the morning breeze tugging at her hair. He's right, she said. My father won't give up. Caleb lowered the rifle, the wood warm from his grip. Then we stay ready. She stepped closer, her voice quieter. Why help me? You barely know me. Caleb met her gaze, surprised at the question. Because nobody deserves what he did, and because this land's taught me a man stands for what's right or he stands for nothing. Her expression softened, a flicker of gratitude breaking through the guarded lines of her face. Thank you, she whispered. Boone pressed against her leg, tail wagging. For the first time since she'd arrived, Ella smiled, a small, real curve of lips that caught Caleb off guard. Something inside him, long buried under years of solitude, shifted, but the fragile moment shattered with Boone's sudden growl. The dog faced the northern rise, hackles stiff. Caleb swung the rifle toward the ridge. A horseman crested the hill, dark against the bright morning. Not the deputy. This rider moved with a predator's patience. Caleb felt Ella stiffen beside him. It's him, she said, voice taut. Jeb. The rider halted just beyond rifle range, sitting easy in the saddle, as if he owned the horizon. Sunlight flashed on a revolver at his hip. He lifted a hand in mock salute, then cupped his mouth. Mornin', sweetheart. Jeb's voice carried sharp and clear. Your daddy says you've had enough playtime. Come on back, and we'll forget last night. Ella's fingers curled into fists. Caleb stepped forward, planting his boots. "Turn around, Parker. You're trespassing." Jeb laughed, a sound dry as gravel. "That your final say, Morgan? Thought maybe you'd be reasonable." "I'm plenty reasonable. Leave." The man's grin widened. "Don't fret. I'll give you time to think." He tapped his hat brim toward Ella. "See you soon, darling." He wheeled his horse and trotted along the ridge until he vanished into a stand of cottonwoods. Boone barked furiously, but Caleb held the dog back, eyes locked on the disappearing figure. Ella exhaled, shaking. "He's not gone for good." "No," Caleb agreed. "He's measuring us." They turned toward the house, the morning sun suddenly harsh. Caleb felt the fragile trust between them solidify like cooling iron. They were no longer rescuer and rescued. They were allies. Inside, Caleb laid the rifle across the table. "We'll fortify the place," he said. "Check every window and door. And before nightfall, we set watch shifts." Ella met his gaze, steel matching steel. "I'll stand guard too." "You sure?" She squared her shoulders. "I won't hide." For a heartbeat, Caleb saw not a frightened girl, but a partner in the fight to come. He nodded. "Then we stand together." Outside, a hawk wheeled across the bright sky, its cry slicing the silence. Somewhere beyond the cottonwoods, Jeb Parker prepared his next move, and the land itself seemed to hold its breath. The fragile piece of morning would not last, and Caleb knew the next time Parker came, he wouldn't ride away so easily. The late afternoon sun slanted across the Wyoming range, turning the wet grass into a field of molten copper. Caleb Morgan rode the northern fence line with Ella beside him, Boone trotting alert between their horses. The air carried the scent of warming sage and distant rain, but beneath the calm Caleb felt a current of unease, like the charged silence before a lightning strike. "Feels too quiet," Ella said, scanning the rolling hills. Her voice held no fear, only sharp awareness. Days of practice with a rifle had hardened her posture, and the set of her shoulders spoke of resolve. Caleb nodded, eyes narrowing. "They're close. I can feel it." Boone stopped suddenly, muzzle lifted, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Caleb followed the dog's gaze to a dark smear moving along the ridgeline, riders, 3 of them, silhouettes against the descending sun. The figures resolved into Hank Hart, Jeb Parker, and a third man Caleb didn't recognize, all mounted and armed. Caleb's heartbeat slowed into a steady drum. "This is it," he murmured. Ella tightened her grip on the reins. "I'm ready." They dismounted in a shallow swale where bunchgrass grew thick. Caleb tied his horse and checked his Winchester. The sun painted the land in long shadows, the breeze carrying the creak of leather and the clink of spurs as the riders descended. Hart's voice cracked the stillness first. "Morgan," he bellowed, drunken slur edged with rage. "You've got something belongs to me." Caleb stepped into the open, rifle at his side but angled low. "Your daughter isn't a possession, Hart. She's her own woman." Hank spat into the dust, eyes bloodshot under the brim of his hat. "Don't preach to me, boy. Bring her here, or we settle it the hard way." Jeb Parker rode a half-circle, cutting the distance like a wolf stalking prey. His smile was a white slash across a weathered face. "You can't hide behind that rifle forever, Morgan. We came for what's ours." Ella stepped up beside Caleb before he could stop her. The evening light turned her hair to dark copper. "I am not yours," she shouted, voice carrying like a hawk's cry. "Not his, not anyone's. I choose my life." The third rider, a lean man with a scar across his jaw, chuckled low. "Bold little filly," he said. "Maybe we teach her some manners." Caleb raised the Winchester, barrel steady. "Another word and you'll regret it." The scarred man's grin faltered, but Hank roared over him. "You think you can outgun 3 of us? We'll take her, and we'll take that ranch while we're at it." Wind whipped the grass into silver waves. Boone growled deep and menacing. Caleb felt the land itself tighten around them. He spoke evenly, each word clipped and cold. "Turn around now, Hart. This is the only warning you get." Jeb shifted in his saddle, hand brushing the butt of his revolver. "Maybe we don't need warnings." Ella's breath hitched, but she held her ground. Caleb sensed her fear and her courage all at once, Two forces fused into steel. Lightning flickered far to the west, a memory of last night's storm. Caleb took a half-step forward, rifle leveled squarely at Jeb. "Draw, and you'll never leave this ridge." The silence that followed felt heavier than thunder. Even the wind seemed to pause. Heart broke first, voice ragged. "This ain't over, Morgan. You can't keep her from her kin." "She's of age," Caleb said. "She makes her own choices. Law's on her side, and so am I." Jeb sneered. "Law don't ride these hills." Caleb's finger tightened on the trigger, but Ella's hand brushed his arm, a quiet signal. Her calm steadied him. "Pa," she called, softer now but unwavering. "I loved you once, but you tied me to a fence and left me for dead. You lost the right to call me daughter." The words landed like a hammer strike. Hank flinched, rage flickering into something darker, shame, perhaps, or the sudden clarity of a man facing his own ruin. He yanked his reins hard. "Fine," he spat. "Stay with your cowboy. See where that gets you." He wheeled his horse, mud spraying under hooves. The scarred man hesitated, eyes narrowing as if measuring the cost of defiance. Caleb kept the rifle trained on him until, with a curse, the man turned to follow Hank. Only Jeb remained. He eased his revolver from its holster with slow, deliberate motion. "You think this ends because he slinks off?" His grin returned, cold and certain. "I always finish what I start." Boone lunged forward, barking ferociously. Caleb sighted down the Winchester, breath steady, heart hammering. "Don't," Caleb warned. "Holster it and ride." For a heartbeat, the prairie held its breath. Then Ella stepped forward, eyes like storm clouds. "Jeb," she said, voice ringing, "if you ever come near me again, I will put you in the ground myself." Jeb's grin faltered. He looked from her to the rifle aimed square at his chest. Something shifted in his face, a flicker of doubt, the first crack in his swagger. "You two think you're heroes," he muttered. But he shoved the revolver back into its holster and yanked his horse around. "This ain't done." He spurred the animal hard, galloping after the others until the sound of hooves faded into the vast silence. Caleb lowered the Winchester slowly, muscles aching from tension. The sun had dipped behind a ridge, casting the prairie in deep gold and shadow. Boone trotted a tight circle before settling at Caleb's side, still growling under his breath. Ella exhaled a long, trembling breath. "It's over," she said, though her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. Caleb scanned the rolling hills, every sense alert. "It's over for today," he said quietly. "Men like Jeb don't forget a wound to their pride." A hawk wheeled overhead, its cry sharp against the cooling air. Caleb felt the weight of the next hours pressing in, the need to reinforce the ranch, to warn the deputy, to decide whether to stand or flee. Ella stepped closer, her hand brushing his, a silent acknowledgement of the bond forged in the standoff. "Whatever comes," she said, "we face it together." He met her gaze and saw no trace of the frightened girl from that stormy night, only a woman forged by fire and wind. Far across the prairie, a thin column of dust rose against the darkening sky, moving faster than any normal rider. Caleb's stomach tightened. Someone else was coming, and the evening light was fading fast. He chambered a fresh round and looked to Ella. "We're not done yet," he said, voice low but certain. "Another rider's on the way." The prairie wind carried a distant hoofbeat, steady, relentless, echoing across the open land like a promise of the next battle. The prairie smelled of dust and distant rain as twilight bled across the sky. Caleb Morgan rode flank to flank with Ella, their horses' hooves drumming a steady warning against the hard earth. Behind them, the cottonwoods of his homestead shrank into the dark horizon. He had insisted they ride patrol at dusk, searching for the mysterious rider whose sudden appearance after the confrontation had left both of them restless. Boone padded ahead, nose low to the ground, tail a stiff banner. Every few strides he stopped to test the wind. The evening air carried a faint tang of wood smoke, too sharp to be from their own stove. Caleb's jaw tightened. Someone had lit a fire where no fire should be. Ella caught the scent too. "North draw," she said, pointing to a shallow gully veiled in shadow. Her voice carried a quiet resolve, that matched the steady set of her shoulders. Caleb guided the roan into a careful descent. The gully funneled them toward a hidden hollow where the smell of smoke thickened. A lone figure crouched near a small fire, feeding it with dry cedar. Moonlight caught the steel of a revolver at his side. "Stay behind me," Caleb murmured. He slid from the saddle, rifle already leveled. "Stand and show yourself." The man rose slowly, hands raised to shoulder height. He wore a battered trail coat and a hat pulled low, his face half in shadow. "Easy, friend," he said, voice calm but edged. "Name's Whit Sloan. I've been looking for you." Caleb's grip tightened. "Why?" Whit stepped closer, the firelight revealing a lean face lined by sun and dust. "Because Hankard hired me," he said bluntly. "Paid to keep watch, maybe take you out if the chance came. But I don't kill without knowing the truth." Ella gasped softly. Caleb steadied his aim. "And now you know. I watched you stand your ground yesterday," Whit said. "Saw the girl speak her mind. Hank didn't tell me he tied his own blood to a fence like a rustler's calf. I don't ride for a man who does that." Caleb studied him, reading the subtle tension in his stance, the way his eyes never left the rifle's barrel. "If you're done working for Hart, why light a fire in plain sight?" "Because I wanted a parley," Wood answered. "To warn you. Hank's riled. He's gathering men from town. Jeb Parker's promising a bounty to anyone who helps take the girl back." The news dropped like a stone in Caleb's gut. He had expected trouble, but not a posse bought with whiskey and coin. "How many?" 5 or 6, maybe more," Wood said. "They plan to ride at first light." Ella stepped forward before Caleb could stop her. "Why tell us?" she demanded. "You could take their money and stay quiet." Wood met her eyes, something like respect flickering there. "Because a man's paid in more than dollars," he said. "And I'd rather ride on with a clean conscience than dirty coin." Caleb lowered the rifle slightly, but did not relax. "What do you expect from us?" "Nothing," Whit replied. "But you've got choices. Leave tonight, and they'll find nothing but hoof prints. Or stay and fight and risk everything." He tipped his hat toward Ella. "Your call, miss. You're the one they're after." The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks into the night. Ella stared into the flames, her face a study in conflict. Caleb watched her, feeling the weight of the moment settle on her slim shoulders. "I've been running all my life," she said finally, voice low but firm. "First from Pa's temper, then from Jeb's threats. If we flee now, we'll keep running. I want it to end here." Caleb felt a surge of fierce admiration. "If you stay, we'll stand together," he said. We gave a single nod. "Then you'll need every advantage. There's an old line cabin 2 miles east. Good sight lines, stone walls. You could hold off a dozen men if you're careful." Caleb glanced at the deepening night sky, stars blooming like silver fire. "You'd show us the way." "I'll ride ahead," Wood said, "but I won't fight unless fired upon. I've no wish to kill men I might have shared whiskey with yesterday." "Fair enough," Caleb replied. He slung the rifle over his shoulder and mounted up. "Lead on." They rode hard under a crescent moon, Boone loping silently at their heels. The prairie whispered around them, rustling grass, the distant cry of a coyote, the soft hiss of wind over stone. Wood kept a steady pace, guiding them through narrow washes and between jagged outcrops until the line cabin emerged from the dark like a crouched sentinel. Built of rough-hewn logs with a chimney of river rock, the cabin offered solid cover. Caleb dismounted and inspected the door and windows. "It'll do," he said. Wood crouched to bank a small fire inside. "You'll need to set watches. They'll come fast at dawn." Ella moved through the cabin with quiet efficiency, checking shutters, stacking extra wood. Caleb watched her, struck again by her resolve. She caught his gaze and gave a faint, brave smile. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying a distant echo of hoofbeats. Faint but growing. Boone pricked his ears and whined. Whit straightened, eyes narrowing. "They're early." Caleb grabbed his rifle, heart kicking hard. "How far?" "Half a mile, maybe less." Ella reached for the second rifle Caleb had loaned her, hand steady. "Then we hold here," she said, through the cabin's narrow window, Caleb saw the first flicker of lanterns on the horizon, tiny, swaying lights moving like fireflies across the dark sea of grass. More followed, a ragged string of them, advancing with deliberate purpose. "They're coming fast," Wood said, voice low. Caleb set his jaw. "Then we make our stand." Ella took position beside the east window, her silhouette sharp against the faint glow of the hearth. Boone crouched at her feet, silent and ready. Wood checked the door bar and drew his revolver, face grim. The night filled with the drum of hooves and the clink of bridles. Voices shouted across the prairie, men calling to each other, rough with drink and bravado. Caleb could pick out Hank Hart's harsh bark and Jeb Parker's taunting laugh. He felt the cabin walls vibrate as the riders closed in. The smell of trampled sage and horse sweat seeped through the chinks in the logs. Moonlight gleamed on rifle barrels as shapes emerged from the dark. "Last chance, Morgan." Hank's voice rang out, echoing off the stone hills. "Send her out, and maybe we let you live." Caleb raised his rifle, steady as bedrock. "You want her," he called back. "Come and take her." A sharp, angry shout answered, followed by the metallic rasp of weapons being drawn. The first shot cracked the night wide open. Splinters leapt from the cabin door as a bullet smacked into the heavy wood. Boone barked fiercely. Ella returned fire through the east window, her shot sparking against a rider's stirrup. Wood crouched low, revolver ready, eyes blazing. The hollow roared with gunfire and pounding hooves, smoke mixing with the sharp tang of powder. Caleb felt every heartbeat like the strike of a hammer. Outside, the posse fanned into a half circle, the shouts rising over the wind. Another bullet whined past Caleb's ear, close enough to burn. He chambered around, sighted down the barrel, and squeezed the trigger, sending a flash of fire into the dark. The attackers wheeled their horses, regrouping, their lanterns casting wild shadows across the rocks. Hank's voice barked fresh orders, urging them closer for a second charge. Caleb glanced at Ella. Her eyes shone fierce and unyielding in the flicker of the firelight. "This isn't over," she said. The first light of dawn spread across the prairie like molten copper, washing the ridge in a slow fire. Smoke from the night's gunfight still clung to the cold air, acrid and metallic. Caleb Morgan tightened the cinch on his saddle while the roan stamped and snorted, eager to move. Beside him, Ella checked the chamber of her rifle, her fingers deft and sure despite the long night. Boone lay crouched at the cabin door, hackles bristling, amber eyes fixed on the ridge where the mysterious whistle had sounded hours before. They had fought Hank Hart's posse to a stalemate in the dark. The riders had scattered when the lone figure appeared on the skyline, his sharp whistle cutting through the gun smoke and confusion. But the standoff had never resolved. Now the prairie lay too quiet, no wind, no birdsong, only the slow creak of saddle leather and the hammering of Caleb's own pulse. A shape emerged against the rising sun, with Sloan, the drifter who had warned them, riding down the slope with an urgency that made Caleb raise his rifle again. Whit reined up hard at the edge of the clearing, breath steaming in the chill. "They didn't leave," he said, voice ragged. Hank pulled back to the cottonwood draw, maybe half a mile south. "They're licking their wounds and waiting for daylight to finish this." Ella's eyes narrowed, catching the flicker of movement behind Whit, dust rising where riders massed among the trees. "They'll come again," she said, steady as bedrock. Caleb felt the truth settle in his gut. "Then we end it here." Whit swung from the saddle, jaw set. "They've got numbers and a grudge, but I know another way to break them." He outlined a plan with crisp efficiency. Drive the cattle from a nearby grazing flat through the narrow pass toward the draw. Spooked and charging, the herd would scatter the posse or at least give Caleb and Ella the upper hand. It was dangerous, but the only way to keep the fight off their doorstep. Caleb studied the eastern sky, already streaked with gold. "If we move fast, we can turn the herd before they circle wide." Ella mounted without hesitation. "Show me where." They rode hard across the waking prairie. Frosted grass broke beneath the hooves in sharp, glassy snaps. The scent of sage grew stronger as the sun warmed the ground. Caleb kept his gaze fixed on the distant dark smear of cattle against the pale hills, every muscle tight, with purpose. When they reached the herd, Wood peeled off to the south to cut a flank, while Caleb and Ella split to the north. Caleb whistled sharply, waving his hat. The cattle shifted uneasy. Boone darted in and out, nipping at stragglers, his barks echoing across the basin. Ella urged her horse along the ridge, calling in a firm, clear voice that carried over the rumble of hooves. The animal stirred, then surged, a living river of muscle and dust. Caleb felt the ground tremble as the stampede began, an avalanche of pounding feet and snorting breath barreling toward the narrow pass. Below, Hank Hart's men scrambled at the sudden thunder. Horses reared. Shouts rose in panic. The sun caught on rifle barrels as riders tried to wheel away, but the charging herd swallowed the draw in a storm of dust and noise. Caleb and Ella kept pace along the rim, rifles ready in case any of Hank's men fired back. Through the swirling haze, he spotted Hank himself, bellowing orders, his face red with fury. The older man raised a revolver and fired blindly into the stampede. A bullet sang past Caleb's ear, hot as a bee sting. He wheeled his horse downslope, closing the distance until Hank's wild eyes locked on his. "This ends now, Hart." Caleb shouted over the roar. "You leave her be, or you'll be trampled with the rest." Hank fired again, the shot kicking dust at Caleb's boots. Caleb leveled his own rifle, but held his trigger, waiting for the opening. Then Ella's voice cut through the chaos, a sharp, commanding cry. "Pa! Stop!" Hank's arm faltered at the sound. He turned toward her, surprise flashing across his lined face. Ella rode straight toward him, fearless, her horse dodging panicked cattle with astonishing grace. "You don't own me," she shouted, eyes blazing. "You lost that right when you tied me to that fence. You come another step and you'll answer to the law, or to us." For a heartbeat the world stilled. Dust swirled in slow golden spirals. Hank's revolver sagged. Behind him his men scattered, unwilling to stand between a raging herd and the rising sun. Hank spat into the dirt, fury twisting into something like defeat. "You're no daughter of mine if you talk that way," he snarled. "I'm a free woman," Ella answered, her voice cutting clean as a knife. "That's all I need to be." The cattle thundered past, carrying the last of Hank's hired guns with them. Only Hank remained, standing alone in the churned earth. He glared at Caleb, then at Ella, and finally swung into his saddle. "This ain't over," he muttered, but his shoulders slumped as he turned his horse and rode into the bleaching light, a solitary figure, swallowed by the empty range. Silence followed, broken only by the fading rumble of hooves and Boone's soft whine. Caleb exhaled the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Wood rode up, hat tipped back, a crooked grin tugging his mouth. "Reckon that's as close as I care to dance with death," he said. "He'll think twice before riding this way again." Ella dismounted and brushed dust from her face. Her hands trembled, but her gaze stayed fixed on the horizon where her father had vanished. "He might come back," she whispered. Caleb stepped beside her, laying a steadying hand on her shoulder. "If he does, he won't find you alone." She looked up at him, eyes shining with fierce relief and something warmer. "I believe you," she said. They returned to the cabin as the morning brightened into clear blue. The air smelled of trampled sage and new beginnings. Caleb set about mending the splintered door while Ella brewed coffee over fresh coals. Wood lingered only long enough to share a mug and a few dry jokes before tipping his hat and riding east, his silhouette soon swallowed by the vast plain. By afternoon, quiet settled like a blessing. Caleb watched Ella move through the small homestead, stacking wood, feeding Boone scraps, humming under her breath. Each motion carried a quiet assurance, as though she belonged to the land as much as the wide sky. He felt a tug deep in his chest, not the restless ache of loneliness, but something steadier, like roots taking hold. "You've got choices now," he said softly. "You can head for town, find work, start fresh anywhere you like." Ella looked toward the distant mountains, where the last wisps of gun smoke faded. "This place feels like the start I've been waiting for," she said. "But I stay because I choose it, not because I must." Caleb met her gaze and nodded, the unspoken promise clear between them. Outside, the sun dipped low, gilding the prairie in molten amber. Boone bounded across the grass, chasing shadows. The wind carried the scent of rain and far-off pine. Caleb reached for Ella's hand. Her fingers twined with his, sure, unhurried, strong. Together they stood at the cabin door, watching the endless sky burn toward evening. From the south, a faint echo drifted on the breeze. A single whistle, distant and sharp. Caleb stiffened, eyes scanning the horizon. Ella tightened her grip. The sound faded, leaving only the hush of the prairie and the quiet certainty of what they had chosen.